Hercules remembered thunder before he remembered falling. The sky of his birth had split with a sound like a titan's shield shattering, and the strength that once carried him through impossible labors now betrayed him, dragged downward by a gravity not born of any world he knew. Olympus vanished in a wound of blinding light, and in its place opened a screaming corridor of color that bled and twisted, alive with whispers that spoke in no tongue of men or gods. He did not scream. He had faced monsters that devoured cities and tyrants who called themselves kings, and he had never begged the heavens for mercy. Yet this descent was different. There was no ground rushing to meet him, no sky above or below, only a vast howling nothing that pressed against his mind. Memories clawed at him as the void swallowed thought, the weight of the Nemean lion's hide upon his shoulders, the Hydra's blood steaming on the earth, the burning madness Hera had once cast into his soul. All of it felt distant now, as though his own legend were being stripped from him, layer by layer. The whispers grew louder. They did not threaten. They promised power without limit, war without end, release from guilt, from grief, from the endless burden of proving his worth through suffering. Hercules clenched his fists, feeling strength still there, coiled and defiant. He answered the voices with silence, and the silence angered whatever lurked beyond the veil. The corridor collapsed inward, folding like a dying star, and the pressure became unbearable. For the first time since his mortal birth, Hercules felt something close to fear. Then the fall ended. He struck the ground like a meteor, stone exploding outward in a ring of fire and dust. Pain lanced through his body, sharp and absolute, and for a heartbeat he wondered if this was death at last. The air burned his lungs, thick with ash and the bitter stench of incense and decay. Above him rose a sky the color of dried blood, split by distant lightning that crawled like veins across the clouds. Towers loomed on the horizon, impossibly vast, their spires carved like the ribs of some ancient beast, crowned with statues of weeping saints and rusted angels. Hercules pushed himself upright. His muscles protested, but they obeyed. He was wounded, yet whole. The ground beneath him was scorched black, etched with symbols he did not recognize, and half-buried bodies lay scattered nearby, clad in heavy armor adorned with skulls and prayers. Their blood steamed where it touched the broken earth. This was no battlefield of heroes and monsters. This was a place of ritual slaughter, where death was not an ending but an offering. He felt it then, a weight upon reality itself. The air vibrated with distant screams, with the echo of unending war carried on the wind. Somewhere far away, weapons roared like angry gods, and the sound did not fade. It was constant, eternal, as if the world itself were locked in the moment before annihilation. Hercules had walked through cursed lands before, but never had he felt a realm so utterly hostile to hope. As he took his first steps across the ruined ground, unseen eyes turned toward him. In the depths of the immaterial, something vast and ancient stirred. A presence tasted the shock of his arrival, the resonance of myth and violence bound into mortal flesh. Amusement rippled through the darkness, followed by hunger. A warrior had fallen into the great game, and the board itself had noticed. Hercules did not know their names. He did not yet know the gods of this place, nor the price they demanded. He only knew that he still stood, that his strength had endured the fall, and that the world around him reeked of endless suffering. As thunder rolled across the crimson sky, the son of Zeus lifted his head and asked a question no one could hear. Had he been cast into a prison or into a war meant to test even the blood of gods? Hercules moved forward through the ruins, each step sinking into ash and powdered bone. The city around him breathed like a dying beast, vents of incense smoke spilling from shattered shrines, their iron censers still swinging as if attended by invisible priests. Bells tolled somewhere deep within the labyrinth of streets, slow and mournful, counting deaths rather than hours. Hercules felt eyes upon him, not the predatory gaze of beasts, but the exhausted watchfulness of a people long accustomed to terror. He passed murals etched into stone, depicting a colossal figure enthroned within a halo of machinery, his features eroded by centuries of devotion. Skulls were mortared into the walls beneath the image, their empty sockets stuffed with candles that hissed and wept wax. This god did not smile, he did not raise a thunderbolt. He suffered, and demanded suffering in return. Hercules slowed, unease gnawing at his chest. He had known cruel gods before, but never one worshipped as a corpse. The living emerged cautiously. From doorways sealed with purity sigils, from behind broken statuary, men and women watched him with hollow eyes. Their bodies were wrapped in threadbare robes stitched with prayers, their lips murmuring litanies even as fear trembled through them. A child dropped to her knees, pressing her brow to the ground. Others followed, a wave of desperate reverence spreading as they mistook strength for divinity. Hercules raised his hands, unsure whether to comfort or flee, the weight of their faith heavier than any stone he had lifted. Sirens wailed, abrupt and shrill, slicing through the bells. Armored figures marched from the far avenues, their boots striking in perfect unison. They carried weapons that growled and clicked, barrels smoking faintly, prayers etched along their casings. The crowd scattered at once, devotion collapsing into survival. Hercules felt the air tighten, sensed discipline forged in endless war. These were not mortals he had known. They moved like an iron will, faces hidden behind visors shaped as skulls. One stepped forward, a symbol of authority blazing upon his chest. A voice boomed, amplified beyond flesh, demanding submission in the name of the emperor. Hercules did not understand the title, but he recognized command. He bowed his head slightly, a warrior's courtesy, not obedience. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. The weapon muzzles rose. Faith, here, was enforced at gunpoint. Shots cracked the air. Hercules moved before thought, a blur of muscle and instinct. Stone shattered as he wrenched a fallen column free, its weight familiar, comforting. He swept it aside, bolts exploding against its surface in showers of sparks. He did not strike to kill. He broke weapons, bent armor, scattered the formation like chaff. Even so, blood stained the ground, and the smell of propellant and incense mingled, choking. When the echoes faded, the armored men lay stunned or broken. Hercules stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving. The civilians did not cheer. They stared in silence, terror deepened by wonder. To defy the emperor's servants was heresy. To survive it was a miracle. Hercules felt the weight of their fear settle upon him like a sentence. Above, unseen, the warp whispered approval and interest. A champion who would not kneel had stepped onto sacred ground. Hercules looked toward the towering cathedral at the city's heart, its doors sealed with chains and seals. Whatever ruled this world waited there, enthroned in death. He tightened his grip, knowing that strength alone would not save him in a realm that worshipped decay, and asked himself whether defiance was courage or merely another offering to the abyss. The bells resumed, faster now, urgent, as if warning of judgment. Smoke thickened, and hymns rose from unseen choirs, a tide of sound pressing upon his mind. Hercules felt something vast stir beyond sight, a will braided through flesh and steel. He turned as shadows lengthened, sensing that this world had measured him and found him wanting. In the distance, engines roared, not of beasts or storms, but of war without end. Hercules breathed deep, steadying his heart, and stepped toward the cathedral, unaware that every step drew the gaze of powers that would test him far beyond mortal trial. The question hung heavy, unspoken, as the doors began to tremble. In a universe built on worship and annihilation, could a hero remain a man? Or would faith itself demand his breaking before the true war revealed its hand and claimed him as prey? Or as something far worse, yet unnamed, waiting in the dark, patient and amused? As the first chains groaned and the silence before revelation closed around his fate, leaving only the echo of bells and the certainty that this world would not let him pass unchanged, nor forgive defiance. Once its masters answered the summons he had unwittingly sounded, a challenge written in shattered stone and blood, calling forth judgment from beyond the veil, where darker gods listened closely, smiling at the promise of struggle to come, and wondering how long a god-born hero could endure a faith forged from corpses and despair, before the Imperium demanded his soul or his annihilation. The cathedral doors did not open. They were torn apart. Chains snapped like brittle bones, and the seals burned away in pillars of white fire as gunships descended from the blood-dark sky. Their engines howled with mechanical fury, scattering ash and debris across the plaza. From their hulls descended giants clad in ceramite and scripture, their armor the color of storm clouds and old iron, each plate engraved with litanies of hatred and devotion. Hercules felt their arrival like a physical blow, a pressure that crushed the air and silenced the bells. These were not men. They were monuments given motion. They landed in perfect formation, boots cracking stone, bolters raised with ritual precision. Their helms turned toward Hercules as one, crimson lenses fixing upon him with cold, inhuman focus. Behind them strode a figure marked by rank and age, his armor scarred by centuries of war, a skull-faced helm crowned with iron laurels. His voice carried without amplification, heavy and final, as though judgment itself had learned to speak. In the name of the emperor, he declared Hercules an abomination. The words struck harder than any weapon. Not enemy, not heretic. Abomination, something that should not exist. Hercules felt the weight of it settle into his chest, a verdict passed without trial or understanding. He had faced kings who spat curses and gods who questioned his worth, but never had his very being been condemned so absolutely. The Astartes advanced. Bolters roared, their thunder shaking the plaza as mass-reactive shells tore into stone and flesh alike. Hercules surged forward, the world narrowing to motion and instinct. He seized a shattered statue and hurled it, the marble exploding against ceramite, staggering even these giants. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, fists colliding with armored chests, the impact echoing like hammer blows on an anvil. Yet they did not break. Where mortals would have fallen, the Astartes endured. They fought with disciplined fury, chainswords screaming as they bit into Hercules' flesh. Pain flared, hot and sharp, and blood flowed freely now, dark against the ash. Hercules roared, wrenching a warrior from the ground and hurling him through a cathedral wall. Another struck him from behind, the blow cracking ribs that had never known defeat. As they fought, Hercules sensed something else beneath the violence: reverence, hatred bound tightly with awe. These warriors believed themselves angels of a dead god, and in Hercules they saw not a rival, but a blasphemy that threatened the fragile order of their faith. Every strike they delivered was a prayer. Every wound they suffered, an offering. The captain met Hercules head-on, power sword blazing with caged lightning. Their clash split the air, strength against engineered perfection. Hercules pushed forward, muscles screaming, forcing the blade aside inch by inch. For a fleeting moment, their gazes locked through visor and blood. Hercules saw no fear there, only certainty. This warrior would die gladly, if it meant erasing what should not be. With a final surge, Hercules shattered the captain's helm, revealing a face carved by time and devotion. The man did not plead. He spoke one final condemnation, lips shaping the emperor's name, before Hercules struck him down. Silence followed, broken only by distant engines and the crackle of fires. The surviving Astartes withdrew in disciplined order, dragging their wounded, bolters still trained on Hercules. They did not retreat in defeat, but in resolve. This was not an end. It was a declaration of war. Hercules stood alone amid the ruins, blood steaming on his skin. He felt no triumph, only the chill of understanding. This galaxy had no place for heroes born of myth. It forged its champions in suffering and obedience, and anything beyond that was to be destroyed. High above, unseen, the warp shuddered with approval. The chaos gods watched the exchange with growing interest. A being who could stand against the emperor's angels was no mere curiosity. He was a challenge. Hercules looked to the broken cathedral, to the corpses and the fire, and felt the first true doubt since his fall. In a universe that named him abomination, how long could he remain himself before war, faith, and the gaze of darker gods demanded he become something else entirely? Darkness crept inward as the last gunship vanished, leaving Hercules alone beneath the ruined cathedral. Smoke coiled upward, carrying prayers that no longer knew their god, and the air grew cold despite the fires still burning. Hercules felt the silence thicken, heavy as a held breath, and with it came a pressure upon his thoughts. It was not sound, not sight, but a presence pressing from below reality itself. Blood soaked the stones beneath his feet, and as it pooled, it began to tremble. The ground vibrated with a distant rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a colossal heartbeat echoing from a place far deeper than the world. Hercules staggered, gripping a broken pillar as the plaza darkened, shadows stretching unnaturally long. He had faced monsters born of rage, but this was older, vaster, a hunger that knew his name without ever learning it. The whispers returned, no longer scattered but unified, layered voices grinding together like blades. They spoke of battle without end, of worth measured only in slaughter, of honor proven through annihilation. Hercules clenched his jaw, memories of bloodshed rising unbidden, the centaurs he had slain, the madness that once drove him to kill his own kin. The voices laughed softly, pleased by remembrance. Far away, beyond mortal senses, a throne of skulls loomed, stacked higher than mountains, slick with eternal gore. Upon it sat a god who did not speak gently. Khorne watched the mortal who had broken the Emperor's angels with bare hands, and approval burned hotter than hatred. This one did not scheme. He fought. He endured. Such creatures were rare, even in an age of endless war. The plaza warped. For a heartbeat, Hercules saw another place layered atop the ruins, an infinite battlefield stretching beneath a red sky, armies clashing without pause, rivers of blood carving canyons through bone. He stood at its center, untouched by exhaustion, every strike perfect, every enemy worthy. The vision pulsed with promise, stripping doubt from his heart. Fight, the whispers urged, no longer hidden. Become. Hercules roared in defiance, the sound raw and furious. He drove his fist into the ground, shattering stone, anchoring himself to the here and now. He declared himself no champion of unseen gods. Though his voice trembled under the pressure, the battlefield vision flickered, resistance earning a ripple of dark amusement from beyond. The presence pressed harder. Pain flared across old scars, reopening wounds thought healed by time. Hercules felt strength surge in answer, drawn forth by instinct, and he hated how easily it came. Every breath fed the rhythm beneath the world, every heartbeat aligning with that distant throne. Around him, the dead Astartes stirred. Their blood steamed, rising in crimson vapors that coiled into symbols of war and wrath. Hercules backed away, realization dawning like ice in his veins. This god did not need consent. Conflict itself was worship, and Hercules had already offered much. With a final effort of will, he turned from the whispers and fled into the shadowed streets, muscles burning, thoughts racing. The pressure eased but did not vanish, retreating to a watchful simmer. Laughter echoed behind his mind, patient and certain. As Hercules disappeared into the ruins, Khorne's gaze followed, unblinking. The blood god did not rush inevitability. War would come to this hero soon enough, and when it did, the question would no longer be whether Hercules could fight, but whether he could refuse the call of a throne built from skulls that already whispered his name. Hercules ran until the whispers thinned, until the ruined streets narrowed into a canyon of collapsed hab blocks and rusted icons. The air vibrated with distant artillery, each concussion a reminder that this world knew no peace. He slowed only when the ground fell away beneath his feet. Reality tore open without warning. The street dissolved into red mist, and Hercules was dragged sideways into a place where time screamed. He struck unseen ground and rolled, rising into a battlefield that stretched beyond sight. Endless war surrounded him. Armies clashed in waves of steel and fury, banners burning as they fell. Here there was no sky, only a ceiling of churning red cloud lit by perpetual fire. Hercules felt no fatigue as he lifted a fallen blade and waded forward. The first enemy met him with a roar, and Hercules answered with instinctive violence. Blows landed, bones shattered, and bodies fell away like wheat before a storm. Each victory fed the rhythm beneath the world. Faster now, intoxicating. The whispers grew louder, praising every strike. Hercules fought on, and the war answered him with endless foes. Hours passed or centuries, he could not tell. He felt no hunger, no thirst, only purpose sharpened to a blade. Khorne's presence loomed, vast and approving, though unseen. A vision unfolded with brutal clarity. Hercules saw himself crowned in brass, standing atop mountains of the slain. No madness touched him there, no guilt. He was eternal, perfect, worshipped through war. The temptation cut deeper than any wound. Hercules faltered, blade lowering as memories of mortal suffering surged. He remembered the innocence crushed by his strength, the blood that never washed away. This war offered absolution through endless battle. He screamed his refusal, hurling the blade aside. The battlefield trembled, offended. Khorne's laughter thundered, not angry, but amused. Strength that denied itself was still strength. The vision collapsed violently. Hercules was hurled back through the red mist, senses tearing as the rhythm faded. He struck stone once more, skidding across broken pavement. He lay there gasping, bloodied, mortal again. The whispers retreated, but their promise lingered like heat beneath the skin. Hercules rose slowly, knowing he had passed a trial, yet invited a greater one. Sirens wailed again in the distance, anchoring him to the city of ash. Hercules steadied himself and moved onward, carrying the weight of what he had nearly become. Behind reality, the blood god watched patiently. Every step echoed with unseen applause. Hercules understood now that refusal did not end the game. It merely set the terms of future war. He crossed into deeper ruins where fires burned in barrels and refugees whispered prayers to dead saints. They fled at his approach, sensing doom clinging to him. Hercules could not blame them, for he felt it too. The sky rumbled, distant guns speaking of wars he had not yet seen. Somewhere ahead waited judgment from flesh and faith alike. Hercules tightened his fists and walked on. In the warp, Khorne marked the outcome. The hero had refused the first offering that made the next trial inevitable. Hercules paused at the edge of a collapsed bridge, staring into a chasm filled with smoke and distant screams. He understood now that the war would follow him wherever he went. Strength invited challenge, and defiance invited gods. The trial had not ended with victory or defeat. It had carved a mark upon his soul. Hercules crossed the bridge as it crumbled behind him. Far beneath reality, the skull throne loomed in anticipation. War would come again soon, and next time, the whispers would be louder. Hercules disappeared into the maze of ruins, unaware that his passage had already been recorded by unseen eyes. Across the city, altars flared and augurs screamed warnings. The galaxy had felt his trial, and it would answer. Hercules did not look back. He carried the memory of endless war like a brand upon his heart. It would test him again. The first trial was complete, but the game had only begun. Hercules marched onward, hunted by faith and watched by gods. The city groaned as night deepened, and the fires painted Hercules in flickering red. He felt the ache of wounds that would heal, and the heavier ache of temptation that would not. Above him, the stars were hidden, as if ashamed to watch. Hercules whispered a vow to himself, unheard by any god. He would choose his battles, even if the universe denied him choice. The ground trembled faintly, as if answering. Khorne's attention lingered, sharp and pleased. The trial had proven enough. Hercules vanished down a stairwell carved into ancient stone, leaving behind blood, fire, and the echo of a god's laughter. The path ahead led deeper into the Imperium's nightmare, and somewhere beyond sight, the next trial waited patiently. Hercules descended until the noise of war softened into a distant roar. His heart still beat to the remembered rhythm, slower now, but unforgotten. The endless battlefield lingered in his thoughts, a warning and a lure. Hercules knew the blood god would call again. He reached the bottom of the stair and paused, listening. Somewhere above, engines howled and orders were shouted. Below, silence waited, heavy with promise and threat. Hercules straightened his shoulders and stepped forward. The trial had shown him the cost of endless war. He would pay it only if forced. Above the warp, Khorne waited, confident. The question was no longer whether Hercules could fight forever. It was whether he could survive refusing to. With that burden heavy upon him, Hercules vanished into shadow. The endless war followed, unseen, patient, sharpening itself for the moment of his next defiance, and watched without mercy eternally. Hercules descended deeper until stone gave way to damp earth, and the air thickened with the smell of decay. The distant thunder of war faded, replaced by a wet, muffled silence broken only by the slow drip of unseen water. Each breath felt heavy, laden with spores and sweetness, cloying and wrong. His wounds, torn open by chainsword and shell, burned fiercely at first, then began to throb with a dull, spreading warmth that unsettled him more than pain ever had. The darkness ahead softened into a sickly green glow. Fungi bloomed along the tunnel walls, their caps pulsing gently like living hearts. Corpses lay half sunk in the mire, armor rusted into their flesh, faces frozen not in agony but in something disturbingly close to relief. Hercules slowed, every instinct screaming danger, yet his body betrayed him. Fatigue settled into his limbs with unnatural speed, strength draining as though bled away by the air itself. Then came the laughter. It rolled through the cavern, deep and wet, rich with indulgent amusement. It was not cruel, nor sharp like Korn's distant mirth. This laughter was warm, almost affectionate, as if greeting an old friend who had finally arrived. The ground softened beneath Hercules' feet, mud clinging to his legs, tugging gently, insistently. "You suffer," the voice murmured, layered and vast, echoing from everywhere at once. "Why?" Hercules clenched his jaw and forced himself forward. Memories of plague-stricken villages flickered through his mind, of mortals begging gods for mercy that never came. This presence felt different. The pain in his wounds dulled further, replaced by a soothing numbness. His breathing eased. For the first time since his fall into this universe, the weight on his chest lessened. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern that should not have fit beneath the city. A garden spread before him, lush and obscene. Twisted trees sagged beneath swollen fruit, their bark split and oozing ichor. Pools of stagnant water reflected a sky that did not exist, buzzing with fat, contented flies. At the garden's heart rose a colossal figure, bloated and crowned with rusted horns, his flesh cracked and weeping yet vibrant with impossible life. Nergal watched Hercules with eyes filled not with hatred, but fondness. "Strength fades," the plague god crooned. "Even yours. Let me ease the burden." Hercules felt it then, the offer. His wounds closed further, skin knitting imperfectly but painlessly. Fatigue slipped away like a forgotten dream. The ache of endless struggle, the guilt of bloodshed, the weight of defiance against gods and empires alike, all of it softened. Here was endurance without effort, survival without struggle. Mercy wrapped in rot. He took an unsteady step forward before realizing it. The ground welcomed him, warm and yielding. Around him the dead stirred, rising slowly, smiling through ruined faces. They did not attack. They reached out in greeting. Hercules' heart pounded. He remembered the cost of mercy bought too cheaply. He remembered villages spared only to rot, lives prolonged only to suffer longer. This god did not promise victory or glory. He promised release. Eternal stagnation disguised as kindness. "No," Hercules growled, the word tearing from his chest. He forced himself backward, each step an effort as the garden resisted, clinging lovingly. The pain rushed back at once, sharper than before, and he welcomed it. Pain meant motion. Pain meant choice. Nergal sighed, the sound like a collapsing tomb. The laughter returned, softer now, tinged with disappointment rather than anger. "You will tire," the god said gently. "All things do." The garden withered around Hercules as he fled, greenery collapsing into sludge, the glow dimming. The laughter followed him, echoing down the tunnel, patient and certain. Mercy would wait. Decay was inevitable. Hercules burst from the earth into night air fouled with smoke and ash. He fell to one knee, retching, blood and bile staining the ground. His wounds bled freely again. The numbness was gone, replaced by raw agony, but his mind was clear. He had refused another god, and the cost was etched into his flesh. Behind reality, Nergal watched with indulgent amusement. Resistance only made eventual surrender sweeter. Hercules dragged himself upright, swaying but unbroken. He understood now that the trials would not come only as battles. They would come as comfort, as mercy offered with poisoned hands. He turned his face toward the distant fires of the city and forced himself onward. Above, unseen bells tolled again, slower this time, as if marking survival rather than death. Hercules moved beneath them, carrying pain like a shield, knowing that laughter still followed him in the dark. Hercules did not collapse again. He walked, Each step tore at muscle and reopened wounds that should have closed, blood marking his path through the ruins like a trail of accusation. The city watched him now with open fear, not reverence. Where he passed, doors slammed shut and prayer sheets were torn down, as if even faith recoiled from his presence. He felt lighter without the garden's false mercy, yet heavier in another way, as though his refusal had carved something out of him that would never return. Pain followed him like a shadow. His body healed more slowly now, strength returning in uneven surges rather than certainty. He realized with cold clarity that something had been taken. Not flesh, not power, but the ease of endurance. Nurgle's touch had offered endless survival, and in rejecting it, Hercules had accepted mortality sharpened to a blade. Every wound would matter. Every battle would cost him something real. He reached a manufactorum district where broken engines loomed like dead titans. Fires burned in oil pits, casting sickly light over refugees huddled in the wreckage. They stared as Hercules approached, seeing his wounds, his blood, and the impossible size of him. A man stepped forward, shaking, clutching a rusted charm of the Emperor. He begged Hercules to leave, not for safety, but for mercy. Misfortune followed giants and gods alike. Hercules said nothing. He knelt instead, ripping a strip of cloth from his own blood-soaked garment to bind the man's wounded leg. The refugees watched in stunned silence. This was not how monsters behaved. Yet neither was it how saints were meant to bleed. As Hercules rose, he felt it again, a tightening in the air. Threads of possibility brushing his thoughts, light and subtle, nothing like the crushing presence of Khorne or the suffocating warmth of Nurgle. This was sharper, curious. The flames bent inward. Shadows stretched and twisted into impossible angles. Hercules' vision fractured, showing him the same moment from countless perspectives. A battlefield where he died nameless. Another where he ruled as a daemon prince. Another where he shattered the Imperium itself. All futures layered atop one another, shimmering and false. A voice spoke, amused and distant. Not commanding, not comforting, instructive. "You refuse death," it whispered. "Do you know what that costs?" Hercules staggered, gripping a steel girder to anchor himself. His thoughts slipped, memories rearranging themselves. He saw his labors not as trials overcome, but as patterns. Tests designed to shape him. Olympus blurred, gods and men interchanging masks. For the first time, Hercules wondered if even his past had been free. The voice laughed softly. Tzeentch did not reveal himself fully. He did not need to. The vision was enough. Every refusal closed one path and opened another. By denying rot and release, Hercules had bound himself tighter to change, to consequence, to a future endlessly rewritten. The refugees screamed as the visions brushed them, some falling senseless, others clawing at their eyes. Hercules roared in fury, forcing his will outward, rejecting the maze of futures with brute defiance. Reality snapped back into place. The flames straightened, the shadows retreated. Silence followed, heavy and strained. Hercules stood trembling, sweat and blood mixing freely. He understood now that survival itself was a choice the gods would punish. To live without submitting was to invite endless correction. High above, unseen, Tzeentch marked the outcome with interest. The hero did not break, he adapted. That made him useful. Imperial sirens wailed again, closer this time. The Astartes would return. So would the gods. Hercules turned away from the refugees and began moving deeper into the city, every step slower, more deliberate. He had refused death. The price was uncertainty, pain, and a future that would never stop shifting beneath his feet. Hercules accepted it without complaint. He had always paid for his choices. As he vanished into smoke and fire, the laughter of the changer of ways faded into thought. The game had grown more complex. And Hercules, wounded and mortal, had become far more dangerous than a champion who simply refused to die. The city folded inward as Hercules pressed on, streets looping back upon themselves, architecture shifting in subtle ways that defied reason. He noticed it first in the statues. Faces changed when he was not looking, saints becoming warriors, warriors becoming beasts crowned with feathers and eyes. His reflection in shattered glass lingered a moment too long, moving a fraction slower than his body. Xianqi's touch did not crush or comfort, it rearranged. The whispers returned, quieter than before, threading themselves through thought rather than sound. They showed him moments he did not remember living. A newborn Hercules lifted from mortal arms, fate already etched into his bones, Hera's hatred, Zeus' indifference, labors chosen not to redeem but to refine, each trial a correction, each victory a narrowing of possibility. "You were never free," the voice murmured, not unkindly. Hercules stopped in the center of a shattered plaza. Above him rose an astropathic spire, its crown shattered, psychic wards bleeding light into the air like a dying star. As he watched, the light twisted into symbols he almost understood. Constellations rearranged themselves, spelling out his name in a dozen forgotten scripts. He saw Olympus again, but not as memory, as a board. Gods as players, heroes as pieces moved and sacrificed. His birth, his strength, even his suffering, all threads in a design woven long before this galaxy burned. The vision expanded outward, showing the Imperium itself as another iteration of the same cruelty, faith replacing caprice, dogma replacing whim, different gods, same chains. Hercules' hands trembled, rage rose, but it had no clear target. How did one strike fate itself? How did one defy a story already written? The air split, and for an instant he stood within a library that stretched beyond infinity. Books floated in endless spirals, their pages turning themselves, each volume a life, a war, a choice that never truly was. In one, Hercules fell to corn and became a living weapon of slaughter. In another, he rotted happily in Nurgle's embrace, eternal and forgotten. In a third, he was unmade by the Imperium, dissected and sanctified as proof that no god but the Emperor could stand. And in one, thin and fragile, he walked on, wounded, defiant, changing nothing yet refusing everything. Xianqi's laughter rippled through the library, subtle and delighted. "That path should not exist," the god admitted, "which is why it interests me." Hercules felt the pull then, not a command, but an invitation, to become an anomaly, to twist the pattern simply by persisting. But even that, he realized, was part of the scheme. Rebellion could be predicted, defiance catalogued. He snarled and slammed his fists together, the sound like thunder cracking glass. The library shattered, books dissolving into ash and light. Reality reasserted itself violently, throwing Hercules back into the ruined plaza. He dropped to one knee, breath ragged, blood dripping onto symbols that faded as they touched the ground. The whispers retreated, satisfied for now. Not because they had won, but because the game had deepened. Hercules remained breathing, remained unbroken, but the certainty of innocence was gone forever. He could no longer pretend his life had been his own. Sirens wailed again, closer, joined by the heavier thunder of armored transports. The Imperium was tightening its grip. Above the clouds, warp energies flared, responding to attention drawn too sharply. Hercules rose slowly. If his birth had been planned, if his suffering had been shaped, then only one thing remained truly his: what he chose to do next. He turned toward the oncoming war, carrying the knowledge that gods, old and new, had written him into their designs. And with every step, he wondered whether the greatest defiance was to reject their endings entirely, or to reach one they had never foreseen, even now still forming, fragile and dangerous, waiting to be claimed or destroyed in the fire yet to come. Hercules advanced as the city convulsed around him, streets trembling beneath the approach of armored columns and the distant roar of war engines. The knowledge Xianqi had carved into his thoughts burned hotter than any wound. He no longer walked as a hero stumbling through an alien nightmare, but as a man who understood that every step might already be anticipated. The thought sickened him more than pain. Searchlights cut through the smoke, white beams slicing across ruined plazas. Vox horns blared decrees of extermination, naming him a warp-tainted anomaly, an affront to the Emperor's divine plan. Hercules moved through the shadows, avoiding the light not out of fear, but calculation. If fate was a script, then hesitation was a line he refused to read aloud. He reached a shattered causeway overlooking a lower district where refugees were being herded toward transport cages. Armored enforcers struck down those who faltered. Hercules watched, fists tightening, anger boiling. He felt the pull again, not from Korn or Nurgle, but from possibility itself. Intervene, and the future branched. Walk away. And it narrowed. He leapt. The impact shattered concrete and sent enforcers sprawling. Hercules moved with brutal efficiency, disabling weapons, breaking armor, shielding the helpless with his own body. Bolt of fire tore into him, detonations ripping flesh and bone. He roared, fighting through agony, dragging civilians to safety as walls collapsed and alarms screamed. For a moment it felt right. Simple, choice answered by action. Then the world fractured. Time slowed to a crawl, reality peeling back like a wound. Hercules saw the consequences unfold in overlapping visions. In one, the refugees escaped and spread tales of a giant savior, drawing cultists and inquisitors alike. In another, the Imperium retaliated with orbital fire, erasing the district entirely. In a third, chaos claimed the survivors, twisting gratitude into worship. Every path bled into another, none clean, none pure. Still you choose, Tsiench whispered, delighted. How inefficient. Hercules screamed in fury and tore himself free of the visions by force of will alone. Time snapped back violently. He stood amid ruin and blood, the refugees gone, scattered into the smoke. Enforcers lay broken or dead. Sirens wailed louder now, panic spreading like fire. Hercules staggered, exhaustion crashing into him all at once. He fell to one knee, breath ragged, vision blurring. He had acted, and the cost was already unfolding beyond his sight. Freedom, he realized, was not victory. It was burden. A shadow fell over him. An Astartes dreadnought emerged through the smoke, a walking tomb of ceramite and hatred. Its vox boomed with scripture and condemnation, naming Hercules a false god whose existence threatened mankind's destiny. Heavy weapons spun to life, targeting locks screaming. Hercules rose slowly. His body screamed for rest. His wounds gaped, yet he stood. Not because fate demanded it, but because he chose to. They clashed like colliding worlds. The dreadnought's weapons tore chunks from the city, each step a quake. Hercules hurled debris, tore plating free with raw strength, hammered his fists against adamantine until bone cracked and reformed. Pain became rhythm. Will became weapon. As the war machine faltered, Hercules glimpsed another vision. Himself slain beneath its guns, his body paraded as proof of imperial supremacy. The future hovered, waiting. No, Hercules growled, striking harder. With a final shattering blow, the dreadnought collapsed, its sarcophagus ruptured. Silence followed, broken only by distant fires. Hercules stood swaying amid the wreckage, victorious yet hollow. The warp stirred uneasily. Gods and men alike had expected a different outcome. Hercules looked at his bloodied hands. He had not escaped fate. He had wrestled it, bruised and bleeding, and forced it to yield for a moment. He understood now that free will was not the absence of destiny, but defiance in spite of it. Above, the clouds churned as warp energies flared. Below, imperial forces regrouped. Hercules turned away from the battlefield and vanished into the ruins once more. The question no longer haunted him. He knew the answer. Fate would pursue him endlessly. The gods would scheme. The Imperium would hunt. But every step he took was still his own. Whether that freedom would save him or damn entire worlds remained uncertain. And somewhere beyond sight, the next convergence of destiny waited, sharpening itself against the certainty that Hercules would not stop choosing, no matter the cost. No matter how violently the universe tried to correct him for it, no matter how many futures shattered beneath his feet as he walked forward into the fire, carrying free will like a weapon no god could ever fully take from him. Hercules fled the battlefield before the smoke could clear, his muscles trembling with exhaustion that no act of will could banish. The city seemed quieter now, not with peace, but with anticipation, as though something waited just beyond the edge of perception. The fires burned lower, their light softer, gilding the ruins instead of devouring them. Even the air changed, shedding its bitterness for a scent almost sweet. He slowed despite himself. Pain dulled, his breathing steadied. The world no longer pressed upon him with hatred or fear, but invitation. Music drifted through the shattered streets, low and resonant, woven from tones too precise to be chance. Each note slid into his thoughts, smoothing rough edges, easing the weight of memory. Hercules clenched his fists, trying to summon anger or suspicion, but the melody wrapped around his mind like silk. A figure emerged from the glow ahead, radiant and terrible in equal measure. Beauty shaped itself to his gaze, a form flawless beyond mortal measure, shifting subtly with each heartbeat to match desire unspoken. Eyes met his, deep and knowing, reflecting Hercules not as he was, but as he might be, unscarred, unburdened, whole. Slaanesh smiled. "You are tired," the god whispered, voice rich with empathy, of struggle, of choosing between horrors. Hercules felt the truth of it strike home, the endless tests, the gods who demanded surrender or annihilation, the Imperium that named him abomination. Here was something different, not war, not decay, not manipulation masked as destiny. This was fulfillment. The world shifted. The ruins faded into marble halls bathed in warm light. Hercules saw himself victorious, admired, celebrated. No screams followed his footsteps. No prayers begged him to leave. Strength was not feared here. It was adored. "You could be perfect," Slaanesh murmured. "No more doubt, no more pain, only sensation without end." Hercules felt his wounds vanish. Scars smoothed away. His body thrummed with pleasure, power refined to exquisite balance. He lifted his hands and saw not blood, but flawless skin, unmarred by consequence. For a moment, the temptation eclipsed everything. What harm was there in rest? In becoming what he had always been praised for, strength without flaw? Then he noticed the silence. There were no voices beyond Slaanesh's own, no cries of the saved, no defiance, no choice, only perfection endlessly reflected back upon itself. Hercules remembered the refugees' fear, the enforcer's cruelty, even the laughter of darker gods. All of it was ugly, but all of it was real. "This is a cage," he said slowly. Slaanesh's smile widened, delighted rather than angered. "All things are," the god replied. "This one simply feels good." The music swelled, urging surrender. Hercules felt desire coil around his heart, promising release from responsibility itself. He staggered, nearly falling, the longing sharper than pain had ever been. To be free of failure, to never choose again. With a roar born of memory and will, Hercules struck the ground, shattering the illusion. Marble cracked into rubble. Light screamed as it tore apart. The pleasure vanished, replaced by raw sensation and burning nerves. Slaanesh laughed, bright and cruel. "You deny even joy," the god said softly. "How tragic." The vision collapsed. Hercules stood once more amid the ruins, knees buckling, blood returning, wounds reopening as if punished for refusal. The sweetness in the air soured, becoming cloying rot and smoke. The laughter faded, lingering like perfume. Hercules dropped to one knee, shaking. He understood now the cruelty of perfection. It asked nothing, and so erased everything that mattered: choice, sacrifice, meaning. He forced himself upright and moved on, slower now, weaker, but himself. Behind reality, Slaanesh watched with fascination. A hero who rejected pleasure was rarer than one who rejected war. As Hercules vanished into shadow, the god's interest deepened. Perfection denied was still desire unfulfilled. And desire, above all, was patient. Hercules walked beneath a sky that churned like a wounded sea. The clouds bruised purple and red where the warp pressed close. His body was a map of pain now. Every wound he carried throbbed with stubborn life, refusing both the mercy of rot and the release of pleasure. He had turned away from war without end, from decay without pain, from fate without choice, and from perfection without meaning. In doing so, he had stripped himself bare before the universe. The city felt different as he moved through it, not quieter, but watchful. The gods had withdrawn their hands, and in that absence, something far worse gathered. The air hummed with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. Hercules felt it in his bones. Refusal had consequences. He reached a vast plaza dominated by a broken statue of the Emperor, its head shattered, its body riddled with shell impacts. Fires burned in the hollows of its chest, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. Here, the echoes of his defiance converged. Warp energies bled through reality, twisting light and sound. Hercules sensed them before he saw them. They came not as one, but as pressure from every direction. Rage simmered beneath his skin. Decay tugged at his wounds. Possibility flickered at the edge of thought. Desire whispered of rest. The chaos gods did not appear in full. They did not need to. Their presence alone bent the plaza into a crucible. Hercules fell to one knee, teeth clenched, sweat and blood dripping onto scorched stone. The weight pressed harder, testing the fractures already carved into his soul. Choose, the whispers urged, overlapping and discordant. Kneel. Hercules laughed, the sound hoarse and broken, but real. He planted his hands against the ground and forced himself upright inch by inch. His vision blurred, but his resolve sharpened. "I have chosen," he growled, voice carrying across the plaza, again and again. The pressure spiked. His wounds split open further. Bones cracked and reset imperfectly. The pain was blinding, absolute. Yet beneath it all, his heart still beat to its own rhythm. Not corns, not nurgles, not senchs, not slaanesh. For a moment, the warp recoiled, not in fear, but surprise. This defiance had no reward to corrupt, no desire to exploit, no destiny to unravel. Hercules did not offer himself as champion, savior, or god. He stood simply as a man who refused to surrender his will. Lightning tore across the sky, striking the broken statue and shattering it entirely. The shockwave hurled Hercules backward. He crashed into rubble and lay still, breath shallow, consciousness flickering. In that fragile moment, visions surged unbidden. Olympus burning, the Emperor enthroned in deathless silence, worlds drowned in blood and prayer alike. Hercules saw himself absent from all of it, a footnote erased by time. The universe would continue without him, the war would rage, the gods would feast. Nothing he did would save it. The temptation this time was despair. Hercules' fingers twitched against the stone. Slowly, painfully, he dragged himself upright once more. Even if the universe did not change, he would. Even if his defiance meant nothing in the end, it would be his. The pressure broke abruptly. The warp retreated like a tide denied its shore. Silence fell, deep and stunned. Hercules stood alone in the ruined plaza, shaking, bloodied, but unclaimed. Far beyond mortal sight, the chaos gods withdrew their attention, not in defeat, but in calculation. A being who refused heaven and hell alike was dangerous. Not because he could conquer, but because he could not be owned. Imperial engines roared in the distance, closer now than ever. Vox networks screamed of escalation, of exterminatus protocols debated in fear. Hercules felt the eyes of mankind upon him as keenly as those of the gods. To the Imperium, he was no savior. He was proof that divinity existed beyond the Emperor, and that truth was intolerable. Hercules turned from the shattered statue and began to walk. His steps were slow, uneven, but steady. He had rejected every throne offered to him, every paradise and every abyss. What lay ahead would not be kinder for it. As he vanished into the smoke, one truth settled into his bones with absolute clarity. The gods would answer his defiance not with temptation again, but with annihilation. And the Imperium, fearing what it could not control, would help them. Hercules did not look back. He had refused heaven and hell. What remained was war in its purest form, and the certainty that the final price of freedom was about to be demanded. The sky burned as Hercules crossed into the outer districts, where manufactorum towers gave way to vast killing grounds cleared for war. Searchlights stabbed upward, tracing his movement with merciless precision. There was no hiding now. The Imperium had spoken, and it spoke only in absolutes. Thunder rolled overhead, not from storms, but from capital ships breaking through cloud cover. Their silhouettes blotted out the stars, vast and impersonal, weapons primed with the authority of extinction. Voxcasters blared proclamations in a dozen languages, declaring judgment passed and sentence confirmed. Exterminatus was debated no longer. One life, however mighty, could not be allowed to unmake belief itself. Hercules felt the weight of it settle over him, heavier than any god's gaze. This was not temptation, this was not a test, this was finality. Armored divisions surged from every avenue, tanks grinding over rubble, infantry forming firing lines with ritual precision. At their heart marched the Inquisition, robed figures flanked by elites, purity seals fluttering like funeral banners. One voice rose above the rest, cold and absolute, naming Hercules an existential threat to mankind's faith. Hercules stepped forward into the open, bolters leveled, targeting runes flared. For a moment, everything held its breath. He did not raise his fists. He did not roar defiance. He simply stood, bloodied and unbowed, meeting the Imperium's judgment with open eyes. He had seen gods and refused them. He would not beg men. The order came. Fire erupted in a wall of sound and fury. Explosions tore the ground apart. Hercules was engulfed in flame and shrapnel, driven to his knees by sheer force. Armor-piercing shells ripped through flesh and bone. Pain unlike anything before tore through him, raw and merciless. This was not the measured violence of a trial. This was erasure. Still he rose. Each step forward was an act of rebellion. He waded through fire, tearing weapons from tanks, hurling wreckage aside. Soldiers broke before him, faith cracking under the sight of a being who refused to die as ordered. The Inquisitors screamed prayers and condemnations, calling down orbital wrath. Above, lances of light speared downward. The ground vaporized where they struck, cities erased in blinding flashes. Hercules was thrown through the air, crashing into a crater of molten stone. He lay there, body shattered, breath coming in ragged gasps, his vision dimmed. This was the end the Imperium had chosen. As consciousness slipped, Hercules felt the warp stir violently. The Chaos gods watched, not with temptation, but with fury. Annihilation denied them their prize. The Imperium denied them their champion. For the first time, both powers reached the same conclusion. Hercules forced his eyes open. He did not know why he still lived. Perhaps stubbornness alone held him together. Perhaps the universe itself hesitated. He pushed himself upright once more, blood pouring freely, every movement agony. Across the battlefield, guns fell silent. Soldiers stared, horrified and uncertain. The Inquisitor raised a trembling hand, voice faltering for the first time. Hercules met their gaze. He did not speak. He had nothing left to prove. The silence shattered as a final order echoed from the heavens. Total annihilation authorized, the fleet aligned for the killing blow. Hercules closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in acceptance. He had chosen defiance to the end. Above him, the sky ignited. The Imperium's final judgment fell, and the galaxy held its breath to see whether a hero could truly be erased, or whether this act of absolute faith would unleash consequences no power, mortal or divine, could control. The light did not end Hercules. It tore the world apart instead. Orbital fire scoured the battlefield, boiling stone into glass and air into flame, yet at the heart of annihilation something refused to vanish. Hercules awoke, buried beneath molten debris, his body broken beyond reason, lungs filled with ash. He did not know how long he lay there. Time had lost meaning when the Imperium tried to erase him. He dragged himself free inch by inch, flesh screaming, bones grinding back into place through stubborn will alone. Around him stretched a wasteland where a city once stood, reduced to a smoking scar visible even from orbit. The Imperium had delivered judgment, and in doing so, had created a myth. News spread faster than fire. Across the sector, astropaths screamed of a giant who survived extermination. Refugees whispered prayers not to the emperor, but to the nameless warrior who walked through holy death. The Imperium hunted the rumor with the same fury it hunted Hercules himself, but truth had already escaped containment. Hercules did not rest. He could not. Survival had reshaped itself into obligation. Wherever he went, war followed, and wherever war festered, he found monsters worthy of his strength. Traitor warbands fell beneath his fists. Daemons were torn apart and hurled back into the warp, screaming defiance. Each battle was different, yet together they formed a grim echo of his ancient labors. He strangled a warp beast that fed on entire platoons, its hide impervious to bolt of fire, but useless against his grip. He shattered a corrupted titan's knee joints and climbed its burning frame, tearing out its screaming core. He crossed plague-choked battlefields without succumbing, carrying the wounded beyond artillery range before collapsing himself. The Imperium named him a catastrophe. Chaos named him an insult. To the desperate, he became something else entirely. Not a god. A reminder. Each victory cost him dearly. His wounds healed slower now, scars layering upon scars until his body resembled a map of war itself. Sleep came rarely, haunted by visions of Olympus and burning worlds alike. He felt himself changing, not in allegiance, but in weight. Every life saved pressed upon him, every enemy slain added another echo to his steps. The Chaos Gods watched with growing unease. Khorne despised Hercules' refusal to revel. Nergal resented his endurance without surrender. Tzeentch struggled to predict him. Slaanesh tasted no satisfaction in his suffering. Hercules had become a contradiction that war itself could not resolve. Imperial commanders began adapting. Entire regiments were diverted not to win wars, but to intercept him. Traps were laid with planetary precision. Sometimes they worked. Hercules fell, broken and buried, only to rise again days later and continue onward. Each attempt to kill him became another story whispered through the underhives and refugee fleets. He no longer asked whether his actions mattered. The galaxy answered in blood. On a shattered moon, Hercules stood alone against a daemon engine forged from thousands of screaming souls. The battle lasted an entire cycle, fire and warp light tearing the surface apart. When it ended, Hercules collapsed beside the wreckage, barely conscious. He stared at the stars, wondering how many labors remained before the universe accepted his refusal to break. Somewhere far away, Imperial strategists began to realize the truth they dared not voice. Hercules was not a single threat, he was a pattern. Wherever absolute faith met absolute despair, he appeared, shattering both. Chaos sensed it too. The gods began to stir in rare alignment. This could not be allowed to continue. A hero who endured without kneeling threatened the balance of damnation itself. Hercules rose again, slower than before, but unyielding. He felt the coming storm gathering beyond the veil. The labors reborn were not meant to redeem him. They were forging him into something the galaxy could no longer ignore. As he walked into the next war zone, fire reflecting in his scarred eyes, Hercules understood at last. These labors would never end. And that, more than any god or empire, was the true test being laid before him. The galaxy began to scream in ways no mortal ear could hear. As Hercules marched from battlefield to battlefield, the warp itself convulsed, tides of unreality crashing against one another as ancient powers shifted their weight. For the first time in millennia, the Chaos Gods did not merely watch events unfold, they reacted. Khorne felt the theft of wars that should have fed him. Battles ended too cleanly, champions slain without exultation, blood spilled without devotion. Nergal sensed endurance denied to him, wounds that refused to fester into surrender. Tzeentch found futures collapsing into improbability, patterns disrupted by a will that learned faster than prophecy could adapt. Slaanesh tasted suffering without surrender, perfection rejected again and again. Individually, they had tested Hercules. Collectively, they recognized the danger. The Imperium churned as alliances formed that should not exist. The great game slowed, pieces momentarily abandoned as four vast intelligences turned their attention in the same direction. Warp storms bloomed across sectors, severing supply lines and drowning worlds in madness. Imperial astropaths clawed out their eyes as visions of impossible convergence burned through their minds. Hercules felt none of this directly. He only sensed that the air around him grew heavier, that each step required more effort, as if reality itself resisted his passage. On a dead world of black sand and broken shrines, he paused, gripping his side as pain flared without wound. The sky split with silent lightning, and shadows moved where none should exist. The war came not with armies, but with pressure. Daemons manifested in numbers beyond count, not as raiding forces, but as distractions, herding Hercules toward unseen coordinates. He fought through them methodically, muscles screaming, blood soaking into alien soil. Each victory felt hollow, as though the enemies existed only to guide him somewhere else. He realized the truth too late. The battlefield shifted beneath his feet, space folding inward as the veil thinned. Hercules was dragged into a convergence where the war pressed so close that reality frayed at the edges. He stood upon nothing and everything, a nexus where gods could observe without fully manifesting. They did not appear as forms. They appeared as sensations. Rage like a furnace behind his eyes, decay like a hand on his spine, possibility clawing at his thoughts, desire whispering at the edge of memory. This was no temptation. It was a declaration of war. The pressure intensified until Hercules fell to one knee, vision blurring, blood seeping from his nose and ears. The chaos god struck not at his body, but at the space around him, rewriting physics in waves, collapsing distance, inverting cause and effect. Each second became a struggle to remain coherent. Hercules roared, planting his hands against the impossible ground. Muscles tore, bones fractured. Still he held. He did not pray, he did not curse, he endured. That endurance infuriated them. The warp screamed as the gods clashed with one another, even as they pressed inward. Their unity was imperfect, strained by ancient rivalry. Each sought not only Hercules' destruction, but dominance over the act itself. The unseen war escalated, shockwaves rippling outward into real space. Entire systems fell silent as reality buckled. Imperial augurs detected the catastrophe too late. Fleets vanished into nothing. Planets slipped into warp storms that had not existed moments before. The Imperium believed this devastation proof of chaos ascendant. They did not understand it was collateral. At the center of it all, Hercules rose. He screamed not in rage, but defiance, forcing himself upright through sheer refusal to fall. The act sent a ripple through the convergence, a point of resistance where none should have existed. For a fleeting instant, the pressure lessened. The chaos gods recoiled, startled by the impossibility of it. Hercules did not attack. He could not. He simply stood, battered and bleeding, and would not break. That was enough. The convergence destabilized violently. The gods withdrew not in defeat, but necessity, their unity collapsing under its own contradiction. The warp snapped back like a wounded beast, hurling Hercules out into real space. He crashed onto scorched rock beneath a starless sky, body shattered beyond healing. He lay there gasping, vision fading, feeling the universe settle uneasily around him. The war of gods had ended without resolution. Far beyond mortal sight, the chaos gods retreated to their realms, enraged and unsettled. Hercules still lived. Worse, he had forced them to act together, and in doing so, exposed the limits of their dominance. Hercules closed his eyes, unsure if he would open them again. The galaxy trembled in the aftermath of unseen war. The final reckoning drew near, and every power, divine and mortal alike, prepared to answer the question his existence had made unavoidable. Hercules awoke to silence so complete it felt artificial. No guns thundered, no warp winds howled. Even pain arrived muted, distant, as though his body hesitated to remind him he still lived. He lay upon cracked stone beneath a sky stripped of stars, a void of ash-gray cloud that neither moved nor burned. The war of gods had passed, leaving behind a wound in reality that had not yet decided how to close. He tried to rise and failed. His strength, once inexhaustible, answered him only in fragments. Bones knit, slowly, imperfectly. Breath scraped his lungs. He laughed softly at the irony. He had defied gods and empires, and now gravity itself felt like an adversary worthy of him. Footsteps approached, careful, reverent, not Astartes, not demons, mortal. Hercules turned his head and saw a small group of survivors emerging from the ruins, soldiers stripped of insignia, civilians wrapped in scavenged cloaks, a priest whose aquila hung broken at his throat. They stopped several paces away, fear and awe warring in their eyes. They did not kneel. "You lived," one whispered, "not as worship, but as disbelief." Hercules nodded faintly. The effort cost him. He felt no triumph in their gaze, only uncertainty. The galaxy had no place for what he represented. A hero who belonged to no throne, no creed, no god. Above them, engines growled. Imperial craft descended at the horizon, cautious now, wary of provoking another catastrophe. The Imperium would come again. It always did. And chaos, though momentarily checked, would never truly withdraw. Hercules understood that his survival had changed. Nothing fundamental about the universe. War would continue. Faith would demand blood. Gods would hunger. The survivors waited as if expecting instruction, or salvation, or judgment. Hercules closed his eyes and searched himself for an answer worthy of them. He found none. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of myth. "Leave," he said, "while you can." Some obeyed at once. Others hesitated, disappointment flickering across their faces. They wanted meaning. He could not give it to them without lying. At last, they departed into the ruins, carrying only the story that a man had stood where gods collided and endured. Hercules lay alone again. Memory drifted through him unbidden. Olympus. The labors. The faces of those he had failed to save. The faces of those who had feared him. He had spent his life measured against impossible standards, first set by gods, then by men. Here, at the end of a galaxy's patience, he understood the cruel symmetry of it. The warp stirred faintly, cautiously. Not with temptation, not with threat, with curiosity. Even now, the powers beyond watched, uncertain what he might yet become. A daemon prince forged by defiance. A martyr whose death would ignite faith. A god born not of worship, but of endurance. Hercules felt the edge of that choice press against him. He could feel it in the way reality hesitated, in the way the pain dulled when he focused inward. Apotheosis waited, subtle and patient. He could rise beyond flesh, beyond suffering, and carve his will into the warp itself. He could become a weapon that no empire could erase. And in doing so, he would lose the one thing he had fought to preserve. He pushed the thought away and forced himself upright, trembling but resolute. Each movement was agony, each breath proof of finitude. He welcomed both. To remain mortal was to remain answerable, not to destiny, but to consequence. The imperial ships drew closer, weapons tracking, commanders debating whether to strike. Hercules met the distant silhouettes without hostility. If they came, he would meet them as he always had, not as a god, not as a monster, but as a man who refused to kneel. The clouds above shifted, revealing a pale sliver of light. Not hope, not absolution, simply dawn. Hercules stood beneath it, scarred and diminished, yet unbroken in the only way that mattered. He understood now. The final question the universe posed to him, not whether he could win, not whether he could survive, but whether a mortal legend could endure without becoming what it opposed. Hercules took a step forward, then another, walking toward the waiting war with no promise of victory and no guarantee of remembrance. The gods watched, the Imperium prepared. The galaxy turned, indifferent and immense. And still, he chose to walk on.